Hello, Elissa.
My name is Elissa Unton, and I am the CEO and founder of ArcVida. ArcVida does personalized tech-enabled career guidance for U.S. professionals. And I have the deep honor of talking with you, Rajkumari Neogy, sorry about that, I'm going to get it right, about belonging at work. So I read an article you wrote, was it this year? Rajkumari? I think so. And I was so struck by that. I don't know if you have a link that you want to share now or later. But the article I read just reached out to me in a really deep way. It's so hard to be human, and belonging and inclusion, oh, thank you, perfect, are really, really important topics when we think about coming to work every day or building a team or finding a job. And so when I read this article, I reached out within the hour to Rajkumari, and then we started our own conversation. And I just couldn't be happier to have you with us talking on a broader platform about this really important topic. It's hard to be human. And especially this week, it's hard to be a Black professional. It's really hard to be a parent this week. So many of us are homeschooling, and I'm right here with you. And it's just hard to figure out, like, how do I lead a team? How do I find a place in the world? How can I show up in a good way and be happy? So lots of intro there about what we're talking about today. Rajkumari, will you tell us about your background and how you came to this work and why it's important to you?
Well, with pleasure, absolutely. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I can get very melodramatic when I talk. So I've been an executive coach for quite some time now. I spent my entire career in Silicon Valley. I started off as a little minion in the tech world at startups. So I spent about 15, 17 years doing startup work. The last startup, so every startup failed except the last one. Uh, and that one was bought out by Adobe. So that was a huge success. It was very exciting, and that's how I walked into enterprise level experience. And then kind of segued off from that into doing my own thing for a little bit, and being a founder on different levels. Had some successes and epically awesome failures, and then had the privilege and honor to work at Facebook for just over 2 years, almost 2.5, and left Facebook actually to build this company, and coming up on 7 years now. Holy moly, cannoli!
Wow. And just briefly, what is your company and who do you serve? What do you do?
Yes, so I'm an executive coach. So for those of you who know the show Billions, I am like a Wendy Rhodes. It's a character on the show who's a psychologist for a firm, a VC firm, venture capital, I think. And so I do two versions of coaching. I work internally with companies as a consultant, and specifically around belonging, exclusion, and psychological safety consulting there. And then I also work externally, meaning that individuals just come to me, or different companies come to me and require or ask for my coaching services for their senior executives.
Great. And I hope later you'll drop more links in for us as we go. Rajkumari also does free boot camps that are available online. Like ArcVida, Rajkumari is interested in access. And isn't technology wonderful, especially when we're all stuck at home now? So, here we are in the world. This week especially has been, just glaring with different things happening. It doesn't stop outside of a working hour or inside of a working hour. So maybe this is too long a question, but overall, what's driving exclusion and how does that show up at work?
Yeah. Well, so great question. And those of you who are in the audience, please click on the first link. It's the Fast Company link. If that resonates with you after you've read it, then please click on the second link. And the second link is access to the Eventbrite Bootcamp that we're starting October 10th for free. It's 6 weeks, and it's literally about rewiring your brain. So that is something that I'm really obsessed with, is understanding kind of executive coaching and company culture, and primarily dysfunction and exclusion through the lens of epigenetics and neurobiology. So I get that those are really big words, and let's go ahead and, through the course of this conversation, define and kind of dissect what the heck all of that is. But let's start with exclusion, because that resonates with people, and everyone can kind of relate. Actually, there are really 3 levels of exclusion. Exclusion actually starts with an aversion to vulnerability. So depending upon your childhood experiences and how you kind of created relationship algorithms with those who were your caretakers, is going to be kind of predominant in how you show up as an adult and engage with others in the workplace. And the first level of exclusion looks like, ridiculing someone, or interrupting them, or even insulting them, or humiliating them, or ridiculing them in some way. And this comes from a power dynamic of, like I said, not willing to be vulnerable, which comes from and stems from a distrust of others. And if that becomes a primary way of engaging with others over time, we move into level 2. And level 2 is gaslighting, which is the ability to intentionally create doubt for someone in their own ways of being. It's also about micromanaging or bullying. And there are bullying is a spectrum. Micromanaging is a spectrum. I definitely micromanage, for sure. There's no doubt about that. The difference for me is that my team and I discuss this, and they have full permission to call me out when I go there. So that's been awesome and difficult. The refusal to take feedback. So the unwillingness and inability and refusal to receive feedback, right, as a leader or as anyone within the organization. And now this is coming from a compounded place of an aversion to vulnerability. But now what we've added here in this level of exclusion is fear of being taken advantage of, fear of losing power. So you can see how it starts to kind of get a little more concentrated. And then the third level is the most treacherous, the most atrocious, and that's where we experience racism. That's where we experience sexism, or any ism for that matter, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia. So that really becomes now when we notice others who are in that place, at that third level, this is really a lens of, or a perception of, a better than, less than. This is really looking at individuals and seeing them as inferior. And this is I think there's so much of that right now in the world around us, and especially in this country. And I'm just going to invite the audience, and along with us, to take a breath, because this is a lot. This is heavy. Really invite the audience to ask questions, comment, please. Engage with both of us. We would love to hear your voice through the chat. So just going to pause here for a moment, and
Yeah, so you're looking at when people show up, and it's really about anyone, but it can be leadership or people on the team where you're worried about, first, someone is worried about being vulnerable, and then there's a distrust, and then you're going down deeper into a loss of control or a perceived risk of losing power. Yep. And then that next level is if you're actively feeling superior to somebody else because of an ism. Is that sort of how you would characterize the drivers of exclusion?
Absolutely. And I just want to kind of back up just a little bit and just kind of underscore and highlight that this all stems from not trusting people, right? This starts at a very early age of who to trust, who's safe, who's dangerous, who's life-threatening, whether it's a person, a group of people, an event, or a situation. And this is very important to understand because our childhood development shows up quite saliently in the workplace.
Isn't that the truth? Isn't that the truth? Total side note here. I didn't expect parenting to be such a powerful check on understanding other people's emotions. I just vividly remember when my daughter was a toddler and like what it meant to live with that level of tantrum in my life. And I just thought, oh my goodness, we are all here with these big emotions. Yeah. So when I have a couple of questions, and I'm happy for you to take this where you want to go. I think one question I had is what the research and science behind this is. And then the other, I think it's related, is what does it feel like to belong? Because when we talk about exclusion, we're talking about, I'm not trusted, maybe somebody hates me, someone I'm working with wants to micromanage me, or fears a loss of power. So what's the flip of that? What does that feel like?
So what's driving those behaviors?
More so on the other side of it, like what does it feel like when it's not that way? Like when you're like, oh yeah, I belong here. This team, this place is totally it for me in terms of being included.
Well, it feels phenomenal, right? It feels incredible. So there's this really interesting thing that I just finished an article which talks about leadership styles. And the truth is that you can have an incredibly successful company motivating your employees through fear. Fear works. Still get stuff done. You still build a company. You get products, you get services, you get market share. What people don't realize is the cost happening behind the curtain when we're motivating from fear. And that cost is insanely high. Right now, mental healthcare costs in the US alone is $191 billion. That's just US. Of that 191, 70 of it, $70 billion is dealing with depression. Depression is an outgrowth of burnout. Burnout is the result of exclusion, not being supported, not being held from a leadership stance with role clarity, with proper resources, with proper time management, with an understanding that right now, given all that we're contending with, which is parenting, showing up at the office to get stuff done, and just trying to live a life while sheltering in place and lack of access to loved ones and our social network, it is taking such a toll on our nervous system. I could spend hours alone just talking about that, right? So when we motivate from hope, when we motivate from psychological safety, when we motivate from belonging, what we are doing is actually creating employees who feel invincible, who feel cared for, who have an experience of connection. And why this is important is because when we motivate from fear, we are driving and propelling our employees forward through cortisol. And cortisol, over long periods of time, damage the internal systems, create inflammation, dis-ease, mental health issues. The list goes on forever. But when we motivate through psychological safety, now we're actually motivating through oxytocin, endogenous opioids, benzodiazepines, serotonin, and even endocannabinoids. And it's phenomenal. It's fascinating. You'll learn all of this in the bootcamp.
Great. So it's what I'm hearing is we're really talking about the behaviors that are going to switch us away from fear. And gosh, I mean, who hasn't worked in a command control environment where fear is the motivator? And you and I could have a whole different series about startups that aren't trying to do that dominant method, because that's a different conversation. But really stepping away from either behaviors we've seen modeled or, and modeled as in in schools, in military, in every kind of sports environment, there's a lot of fear. You're going to lose, somebody's going to die, right? You're going to be suspended. So that whole fear model moving toward support, inclusion is actually going to trigger the positive chemicals in our brains. I'm saying our, but it's us and the people we're working with.
Yeah, and I just want to be really clear, there isn't any positive chemicals or negative chemicals. We need cortisol every morning to get up out of bed and go to work.
Thank you for saying that. Maybe a little caffeine too.
Yeah, exactly, and too much oxytocin creates other issues. Too much endogenous opioids create other issues. So we're not going to go down that route today, but when we kind of have the understanding, to your point, Elissa, is it Elissa? Am I pronouncing it right?
Elissa, thank you.
Thank you. When we go down that route, Elissa, what we have to understand is just like water. Too much water, flood. Not enough water, drought. Perfect amount of water, right? We grow plants, we hydrate, we have this amazing experience in our ecosystem. So we need to balance and learn to self-regulate in the moment. And right now, more than ever, that is beyond critical. And there are so many resources and tools available on how to learn how to self-regulate. And that is the number one thing that I'm working with my clients is, I'm working from home. When does it stop? When am I not working? When am I at home? I don't have that delineation anymore.
Wow.
So we're actually kind of imparting incredibly very simple tools like time blocking. Take 30 minutes, do yoga, stand up, get a standing desk. These are so important little things that will help that neurochemical flow kind of create a better psychologically safe internal state for you.
Oh my gosh. I love this focus on really tangible behaviors that we can take personally and also that we can, incorporate for our teams. I want to go back. There's a question that I think is a good question, and it also relates. So I hope I'm saying this right. Ancient is the person answering. So the question there was that the initial levels, and I think this came in when we were talking about exclusion. So the initial levels seem very harmless and may often go unnoticed. How do you identify and highlight them? So,
I mean, did it feel yucky to you? There's a reason why we have a body, even though so much of media tells us we don't. And not to feel our body and not to feel our feelings, right? There's a really interesting opportunity here to answer this question because it's kind of a little complicated of a question. Let's talk about epigenetics for a moment. And let's kind of dive into this question through the lens of epigenetics. So epigenetics is the following. It's this relatively newer science. And there's some pretty amazing folks out there, epigeneticists, their research is just mind-blowing. Epigenetics is the following. It is transgenerational stress factors that are passed down to you and embedded in your cellular biology. So just think about that for a second. Past generations, where you come from, your family, actually have cells embedded in your body. Here's the kicker on this one. We carry the traits, tragedies, and traumas for over 200 years in those cellular structures of our body. So that means that you are walking around with mindsets, mentalities from what your grandparents experienced. Great Depression, famine, immigration, genocide, civil war, all around the world. So when we think about this, it's kind of mind-blowing. And newer research is coming out that's saying it's 490 years. And Elizabeth's like, I don't even care how many centuries. Like, even one is enough, right?
I mean, this is such a complex issue. I think, when I'm listening to this, I just think, gosh, I need a lot more education on epigenetics. And I think, without totally jumping off into a tangent, I don't want to keep asking that question. But I think that the point here is that it's deep, in that it's really that it's so ingrained in our bodies that we can trust the feeling. Is that how you would say?
So I'm going to be very careful in answering this question.
Okay.
The following. So I would invite people to, yes, of course, dive into epigenetics to the degree that you want to, but we don't need to understand it. What we actually need to understand is the following. What beliefs, core thoughts, core behaviors drove my father? What core beliefs, core behaviors drove my mother? What core beliefs, core behaviors, core experiences drove my grandparents? How did that impact them? Because all of that is coming and titrating into you. So how do we translate this to the workplace, right? We don't need to become therapists, psychoanalysts, archaeologists. We don't need to be any of that. What we need to do is look at our day-to-day experiences, whether it's romantically, personally, professionally, what's not working, and then tie that back to the patterning and go and find that. Every single time I sit down with the client, every single time, and I start to draw out their epigenetic map. So it's them, their parents, their grandparents, and we just kind of capture for about 40 minutes some historical data. That is it. And then I say, so because this happened with father's father, this is actually showing up in your life this way. And then they go, oh my gosh, I didn't even think of that. Holy moly. This happens every day. Every day.
Yeah. Well, and that's so powerful when we start thinking about teams and stuff. I'm going to shift the conversation here to talk about, and this is just for everyone who's joining us, this is as advertised. We're going to talk about two topics. So I wanted to talk about, and I know this isn't a very long period, but I wanted to talk about first job search for someone a professional who's looking for a fit or a way to align their values. That's the first topic. And then in a little while, we'll switch over to the leadership aspects. As leaders, what are the specific things we can do to start, and things, I mean, behaviors, structures, process that we can do. So starting first, and please do ask your questions as we go. You can ask a question down in the middle. If you hover your mouse over the ask a question, you can pop up there, or you can put it into chat. So the job search as a professional, you mentioned the isms. We talk about the isms a lot, right? Racism, sexism, bigotry, you could just jump into all of it, right? So what questions does the job searcher, and maybe it's not questions, but what indicators is a job searcher, or questions, what indicators a job searcher looking for, or questions is a job seeker asking in research conversations or interviews to determine how their values and their needs are going to align with the organization so that they can belong?
For sure. So first and foremost, I interchange the word values and needs. For me, they are identical. They're absolutely identical. The value of trust is a need for trust. The value of respect is a need for respect. The value of belonging is a need, right? And then they have these little sentences, like, well, what it was, some little sentence structure that I can't even think of any right now, which is bias toward action, for example. So what is that? What's the underlying need there? Is it like competence? Is it movement? Is it efficiency? Is it, execution? Like what need is that? So understand the organizational needs and values, their values, and correlate that back to your values. And then ask questions on how they're showing up and embodying those values. And ask difficult questions like, you're really valuing belonging. So how do you actually talk to someone who's harassing someone else, an employee. What do you do about that? If you value psychological safety, how do you have difficult conversations with people who are behaving in ways that are creating toxic work culture? How are you holding people accountable? Right, ask these questions because you want to make sure that there is behavioral and policy alignment with the organization and their values so that you can understand how you kind of will show up and feel successful and competent in this workplace. You can
Yeah.
even ask them, how do you create inclusive work cultures to support and ensure the safety of the BIPOC community? If they falter, if they can't answer that, if they give you some like nonsensical response, there's your answer. And say, that does not feel like an actual answer to me. That feels like spin. I mean, be honest. Because if you're not hearing what you need to hear, then you're setting yourself up for something that you don't know what will happen, right? And that
Yeah.
uncertainty can be really scary.
Yeah, really scary. Yeah, and just as a side note, I don't know, I'm not looking at the attendee list. Those of you who are working with ArcVida already may already know this, but that these questions we think are the kinds of questions that happen before an interview. So these are
Yeah.
great questions to ask when you're talking in research conversations near peers, either people who work in the company or in the specific department you're thinking about. If not, people in the industry, especially in the same geography, given the historical reliance on geography, which is changing really fast, but or in a smaller organization, people in the same sector will know what a different company is standing for. So great questions to ask, and we'll go back later and pull those out so that we can put those as clips, and people don't have to try to remember them.
But before we move on, may I just jump in and share something
Yes.
about what you're saying? Yeah. So when you ask these questions, are they via email or? Please.
No, so this actually, you tell me. So when at ArcVida, we think that the number one way to figure out where you're going to belong and where you're going to really thrive is by talking to people who are near or close to the place where you're going to be. So
Yeah.
that's where I was setting that context. But you tell us, what do you think? Where do you think you would be asking?
Yeah, no, I don't know. But so what I was going to say was so much information comes through non-verbally. If the person starts to fidget, get uncomfortable, look down, look away, not give you eye contact in these uncomfortable conversations or in these very forthcoming questions, that will give you volumes of information. If you ask how people take accountability and they can't share a personal story, or if they're unable to say, yeah, that's a great question. I don't even know how to answer that. Like, we're working through that. Like, if they're showing up from that really vulnerable, transparent, authentic place, that's a huge win. But if they give you some canned answer, like, pay attention to that and watch how they react to the questions, because that's going to tell you so much.
Yeah, yeah. What about it, prior to, if for someone who's looking for a job, there's a lot of research that's happening. They're putting together the pieces of their own puzzle. So what about physical or brand, physical structure or brand structure or printed materials, interviews, that sort of thing? What would you look for as a job seeker? What would you tell a job seeker to look for,
Yeah.
the indicators of inclusivity?
So see if there's resonant languaging for you. What the heck does that even mean? Okay. So in your brain, you have two hemispheres. And everyone on the planet is at least bilingual because each hemisphere speaks differently, actually. So the left hemisphere speaks transactionally, and the right hemisphere speaks relationally. What that means is when I am speaking from the left hemisphere, I'm all about problem solving. I'm all about measuring and evaluating and comparing, which is super, super important when we're building product and and services. Absolutely, especially building a company. But I also, as a human being, need to connect with people from a personal level and be in relationship with them, right? So when we talk about feelings, when we talk about needs, when we can actually listen to feedback and be accountable and have an experience of empathy, that's all from the right hemisphere. So in particular modalities, what we're looking for is the way that the language is structured, like you said, on the website or in a brochure. Are they speaking from a place of fear? Are you sure you want to keep doing this? This might be bad for you and you should try this, which is like all of our insurance, right? All of our insurance advertising is about fear-based ways of connecting, right? You don't want to have that experience, right? So listen for those words and those ways of those answers to your questions, because you might be more of a relational way of speaking, which is, we could say, growth mindset versus mixed mindset, or scarcity mindset versus abundant mindset. So really listen to the languaging that is being spoken to you to see if there's resonance, and that there's also flexibility, because maybe you're someone who wants both and needs both. And most people, I will tell you, speak from the left hemisphere and shy away from relationality.
Yeah. Well, and even, I don't know what the timeline is, you probably do better than I do, but even 10 years ago, like, it was discouraged to talk in relational terms about professional work or professional guidance. And so many of the leading thinkers, you know, I think of Brene Brown because I just listened to her podcast the other day, but so many of the voices that are talking about relationship now it just was a little bit absent from the business conversation previously.
Because we didn't understand the neurochemical and neurobiological aspects of the right hemisphere. And we didn't also understand that trauma is based in the right hemisphere. So when we don't actually have the capacities, capabilities, and resources to work through our own discomfort in the moment of having a conversation, then we move into the left. We bring up more data, we deflect, we blame. And so really becoming masterful at being able to become fluent in both hemispheres, vacillate in the moment, and attune to the needs of the person with whom you're speaking is so critical. And you will learn that in the Biology of Belonging Bootcamp starting in October.
Yeah, well, and just listening to you, like, as a leader, and for everyone who is a leader, and most of us are in lots of different ways, you know, it feels like a lifetime of good work. Like, how can this is aspirational. We're not done at any point. This is things we go toward.
And I just want to say to the audience, like, it doesn't have to be this, like, tell me about when you were 3 and how, like, no, you don't need to go there to be relational. I will tell you what my boss at Facebook did, what was mind-blowingly awesome. So honestly, my boss at Facebook, I call him by name all the time because he's so amazing and still is, Stuart Crabb. And if you ever have a chance to meet him, please do. Now, you can imagine that Stuart, who's the head of L&D at Facebook, so he's fourth down from Mark, has a lot going on, right? Just a little bit of a busy guy. And you might think, oh, well, then he has no time to be relational. Au contraire, ma chère. What actually was happening, which I realized very quickly, is he would ask for something and then quickly put a smiley face. And it changed the tone so beautifully in the request or the demand in the moment, because he would say, hey, Rajkumari, I need da-da-da-da by this time. Smiley face. I was like, you got it. Absolutely. And that continuous place of safety was absolutely phenomenal in trusting him and showing up for him and feeling incredibly motivated.
Yeah.
So tiny things make such a huge difference.
Well, this is actually a perfect segue into the second part of the questioning. And by the way, we are going to leave more time for more questions later, but you can ask a question now. If you see in the bottom center of your screen, you can just hover there over ask a question to ask a question. But shifting the topic, so here we are, not everybody, many people are working remotely, and teams have leaders. Most of the leaders are distracted by fears of what's happening in the economy, struggles with homeschooling, inadequate family caregiving support. I mean, we could just go on and on. So here we are living humanly in today's world. What can we do? What can leaders and I'm using the term leader broadly. So all of us lead in different areas, whether you have a title of leadership, whether you're creating a team, or whether you're leading your clients if you're in a client service mode. So how can leaders, what specific behaviors, like the smiley face from your boss at Facebook, what specific behaviors can we do to create inclusivity? Not to be aspirational, but to literally create inclusivity today.
If you do not know how to self-regulate, then you are in a direct path to anxiety. If you do not know what self-regulation means, then you are leaving yourself in the dust. You have to prioritize your well-being first and foremost. Whether it's 30 minutes of listening to music that you enjoy that calms you, whether it's sitting out on your deck with a nice lemonade underneath the breeze. I cannot emphasize this enough. You are not robots. You are humans. So, first and foremost, learn what self-regulation is and how to do it. How the very first step in self-regulation is to breathe. I am not kidding. When you exhale from your lungs, acetylcholine is secreted. That then communicates safety to the brainstem. The longer the exhale, the better the diaphragmatic way of breathing is for you. The more acetylcholine is secreted, the calmer you become, and more importantly, your team picks up on this. There is a phenomenon that talks about how brains start to kind of connect in a meeting with each other's brains, and we start to create a group brain. As a leader, you're leading, and you are absolutely leading with your breathing. I cannot even begin to tell you the power of controlling your breath controls the dynamic and tension in the meeting. I've taught this to every single client. They come back and they go, that was incredible. That I'll never do anything but that moving forward, right? So the first thing is to create an understanding and a connection to you through slowing things down and breathing. That's thing one. Thing two is understand that if you are only coming from transactional problem-solving left hemisphere ways of talking, that you are going to actually create stress and anxiety for your people, that you have to show up from a relational standpoint. What does that look like? Many companies do recognition of their employees really well. Many companies don't understand how to appreciate employees. So recognition is a left hemisphere experience which actually acknowledges their behavior. Oh my God, you actually made that deadline for that client and that was so awesome, thank you. And then the appreciation piece, oh my gosh, I so appreciate how you have so much care, concern, and dedication and drive to ensuring that our clients get what they need, right? So it's behavior and then it's needs and feelings. I'm recognizing what you did. I'm appreciating your personal values of who you are and what you bring to this team. That is actually bringing your whole self to work and being able to motivate your employees into a high performance piece. You recognize them and give them money, but you actually appreciate who they are. They're going to light up like little fireworks for you.
I love how simple you're able to put that together. I'm recognizing what you're doing, and I'm so appreciative of who you are, why you're showing up this way for our team, for our clients, because that feels really doable, right? As leaders, there's a lot of like, do everything that takes all the time. Whereas, hey, you did great, and thank you for being who you are. That, to me, as the leader, that feels really achievable.
Yeah, your ability to prioritize customer concern to get this product completed by the deadline we needed to hit the OKR. One sentence. And they're going to be like a little puppy dog. Thank you. They're going to like, puppy off and go do their things. And that's what Stuart did. He did that so ridiculously well with me that I would work on weekends. I'm like, 10 extra hours to get this project, let's go. And because of that, we were actually compliant at 96% for a moment when we were doing the anti-sexual harassment training. It was amazing, right? Like, that's what high performance is about.
Yeah. And I love the tie into high performance. When in the past, and again, the world is shifting in a good way, but in the past, performance and productivity was really separated from how your team feels. That fear motivator versus like recognition and inclusion motivator. So as leaders, here we are, we're working away. What can we do when we see or someone brings exclusionary behavior to our attention? What do we do to go there?
Yeah, so just before we go there, I'm not seeing anyone's comments, and so I'm not sure if people are seeing my links. So I don't know if that's coming through. Are you seeing the links?
I am seeing the links. So I think people are listening, but maybe not commenting, and certainly understand that. Feel free to jump into the comments and say how you're feeling about, as a leader, or if you're job searching, if this is resonating with you, give us a thumbs up to let us know how this is going. And again, ask a question if you're, as you listen, you haven't want more on a topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm sorry, tell me your question again.
So here we are, we're on a team, everybody's working remotely or part remotely, and we have a structure where people know to come to us when there's exclusionary behavior.
Right.
And then what can we do? And I really want to make it tactical because, this is today. It's hard to be human. It's hard to be a leader. It's hard to be a professional. And on both sides, there's fear. When people are bringing exclusionary behavior to a leader, it can feel risky. And so what do we do in response to someone bringing that behavior to our attention as a leader? And then what do we do to move forward? And I'm saying move forward because I don't know what that verb is. Like, then what?
Yeah. So have you ever wanted to lose weight and stop eating more than you needed to eat?
For those of you who know me, I spend most of my free time cooking and eating. So yes. Have you?
For sure. And the question is, look at me. Yes. The question is, when someone says, well, don't do that, has that been helpful? No. Of course not. So going to a leader and saying, hey, we need to stop doing this, the leaders, and it's been going on for a while, that's not the entry point, right? So a book to read that might be helpful is called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss.
Oh, I'm actually reading that right now. And I'll drop that into the chat.
That's awesome. So his whole algorithm of connection as, a hostage negotiator working for the FBI is really around tactical empathy. And tactical empathy, Daniel Goleman actually wrote about this before Chris Voss. Chris Voss just made a really cool marketing terminology around it, which I think was brilliant, actually, is that there are three types of empathy. There's affective empathy, there is cognitive empathy, and there is compassionate empathy. And what's fascinating is what Daniel and Chris don't talk about is the neurobiology between both hemispheres that's happening in this algorithm. So When we talk about tactical empathy, what we need to do is express from the right hemisphere what's not going well from a relationship standpoint. I'm noticing that people aren't speaking up as much as we would like to have in the team meetings. I'm concerned that we're leaving productivity dollars on the table because people aren't sharing their ideas. We're not getting creative solutions to these issues that we're addressing. And I'm curious about why that is, leader. And I'm wondering what we can do about it to start to incorporate the voices in these conversations. Now, I don't know what your leader is. Your leader could be a bully. Your leader could be very open, right? So you need to understand where that dynamic exists. And if the leader is a bully, if the leader is creating toxicity, if the leader doesn't want to actually hear anything about this, whatever feedback, that's right there, level 2 of exclusion. You got that right there, right? Mm-hmm. And then you need to go to the HR, right? And if you don't actually have a robust HR team, or one that's completely incompetent and doesn't actually have a sense of understanding of their employees, which exists at a proliferate extensively within organizations, then you need to figure out and come back to your own values. Is it actually serving you to be in this toxic environment? And so this is really a very challenging, complex way of engaging. But if you're not able to give feedback, go to HR. If HR is not able to support you, now you have an opportunity to make a difference. We hope that the leader is willing to recognize their behaviors.
Yeah. So as a leader, someone comes.
One more thing. It's really important. If you're not getting anywhere with this leader, I would invite you to say the following sentence. This happened to me in December of 2019. I flew to LA to do a full day leadership training, met the CEO for the very first time, and the CEO, in the first 2 minutes of talking, asked me, what's the point of me being nice to my employees? And I said, every single time you interrupt someone, you dismiss them, or you ridicule or humiliate them in some way, you are shutting down the parts of their brain that is making you money. And that CEO looked at me and said, oh, so what should I do?
Yeah, it's a powerful sentence because everybody's working to create value, make money in some way. So that's a really powerful sentence. What about on the flip side? Someone comes to us and, you know, I shouldn't assume, but I suspect that you've been in this place too, when the notification of exclusionary behavior that someone's bringing is a complaint and a hurt. I'm hurt. This is what's happening. What's the right approach for that immediate response? And then what do you think happens next when, as a leader, someone is coming to you and saying, you know, the assumption I'm making here is that anyone who's watching this is trying to be in a place of creating an inclusive team. And the complaint comes in. This is happening. It's exclusionary. I'm upset. Then what?
3 things that I would say. First, recognize that the person came to you. Recognize their concern. Recognize that whatever is coming up for them is a truth. Reward them by appreciating their honesty. Reward them by appreciating that they had the courage to come forward and share that with you. And then something we used at Facebook a lot was, how can we partner on this project together? That was kind of how we ended meetings. So figure out what feels resonant and aligned with you and connect with this person and say, how do we solve this together? Right? Well, I don't want that person to work here anymore. Yeah, that's a bit more complicated. Yeah. That's not actually something we can solve for. But what we can bring back is, hey, as a leader, I'm happy to talk to this person and bring awareness to their behavior. And for this person who brought the concern forward, What do they need extra? Do they need a little bit more downtime to recover? Do they need a little extra support? Do they need to be encouraged to go find extra support externally? I think that for me is really important for leaders to be comfortable in recommending external support. And if you have those resources as an organization, to guide them to those resources so they can find that support. It is, again, like I always say, it is never your job as a leader to play therapist. That is first and foremost. But it is your duty as a leader to show up and show that you care and that you are aligned with psychological safety for the performance and well-being of the team.
Yeah. No, I love that. And showing up with empathy and caring, that feels, that's incredibly human. That feels like the very best aspects of family and friendship, and what a lovely way to bring that to work. I'm looking at the rest of my questions. I think what I actually wrote is a book outline. So I don't think we're going to get there today. But I want to, we've got 6 more minutes here, and I want to encourage the audience to ask questions, or if you want to suggest a topic, that's great too. We'll definitely do a follow-up email. I think the resources you can recommend is actually a great follow-up email to leaders, and also some of that, we'll go back again and do a write-up of some of the advice here. But we do have one question coming in, and I'll give you a chance to think too, Rajkumari, if there's something that we've been talking about that you want to elaborate on or go back to. I want to give you space for that as well.
And what's the question?
The question is, your manager at Facebook was very supportive, but then you mentioned in one of your videos that you felt excluded, and that's the reason you left. So I think someone's been doing their research. So that's a great question. So if my manager is excluded, is my manager supported? I like my manager, but I'm excluded.
Yes.
So I'm leaving. So
yes. I mean, that just shows you the power of exclusion. Right. So I had a phenomenal relationship with my boss. I loved my boss. I loved the role that I did, and I loved being part of the creation of the projects that we put together. But I was not treated nicely at Facebook, and that overpowered and kind of overshadowed all of the niceties of my boss. I just couldn't take it anymore. It was just destroying my mental health.
Yeah. Well, and that is also the power of team, for sure.
Yeah.
I would say a lot of people who come to work with ArcVida are in the place where they're stuck in their career. And sometimes that's because they have a toxic or ineffective manager. And sometimes, there's lots of other reasons people are in transition, but feeling like you're in a place where you don't belong and are excluded is an extraordinary reason for moving on. And I think in the past, the advice was, grin and bear it, stick through it, etc. What I heard you say earlier is, when and I'm asked this the question. So I think I heard you say earlier, when you know that you're in a bad place, that you're being excluded, you should look for the next thing. Is that?
It really, yes. I mean, if you can, and if you have the resources and capacities and capabilities to move on, please do so. However, asterisk, 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 do your epigenetic work.
Meaning understand yourself and your boss? Like, what do you mean, do your epigenetic? What does that mean?
Right. So most likely, don't know for sure, would have to be working one-on-one with people. Most likely, this is a passed down patterning. The stuckness that one might be experiencing most likely is passed down generationally, transgenerationally. So I would get really clear on figuring out how that's showing up in your life, seeing if you can correlate that pattern to parents or grandparents, and then maybe come to the boot camp or find external resources to help you kind of surface and release and integrate that. I have seen so many patterns that are occurring with senior executives based on their epigenetic map, period. It's just mind blowing.
Yeah. Well, this conversation has flown by for me. I hope everyone listening has enjoyed it also. We will follow up with the links both that you shared in the chat, and also we'll follow up with more information about ArcVida. If you're actively looking for your next role, your next place, ArcVida helps you. That's what we do. This week we have 2 foundational workshops. They're 4 hours long, and Anna Hunter is leading them. They're really about who are you, what makes you happy, what are your top skills, and how do you make your best decisions. Awesome workshops. Even if you're not quite sure you're actively looking, $39 in 4 hours of your life, you're going to get a lot out of it. So we'll send you those emails. Anything else that you want to highlight as a resource or as a jumping off point that we haven't talked about, Rajkumari?
Yeah, if you're very curious about the neurobiology of your life and what makes you tick, there's a great book called Your Resonant Self by Sarah Payton. We just went live with a podcast series that's on my website. It's called The ROI of EQ. It's 12 plus a bonus, so 12 episodes plus a bonus hour. Right now, 3 of the episodes are live, so please dive in and start listening. Apologies for the audio. I'm still trying to figure that part out. But overall, I think the content is well worth it and really helps shed some light about how and why people are showing up in the workplace.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm just going to put that in the chat too. So Your Resonant Self, and who's the author? Sarah
Payton, Peyton.
Right.
Really great book to dive into and play with.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone, and thank you, Rajkumari. Such a pleasure. As I mentioned earlier, I talked to a lot of people, and meeting you has given me so much hope for where we're going and the world that we're building. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for the work you do. I think it's really powerful work.
Thank you so much. And what a touching statement to end on. Thank you so much for saying that. And for those in the audience, please come join us in the boot camp. It's going to be a seat buckling moment.
All right, great. Well, I'm going to go ahead and end the broadcast now. Thank you all for joining us.
Bye, everyone.